In our story for all ages today, we heard from Francine Christophe, who at 8.5 years old was in a concentration camp with a single bar of chocolate for comfort for the worst day when she should need it, saving it for that dark day. And when a woman at the camp went into labor, a very difficult labor, her mother asked to give that bar of chocolate to her instead. The woman lived, and the baby grew up to repay Francine unexpectedly by bringing a bar of chocolate to her in her 80s. I love this story so much. And I love it for a lot of reasons. The fact that the baby only cried the day the camp was liberated, to only cry when it was finally safe to do so, the idea that the baby was born that day with freedom. I love that the story acknowledges how crucial those little comforts are to our humanity, how we need, from time to time, just a little something to give us hope, just for today, to make it through. And I think it's very true. But I also love that story for what it does not do. It doesn't erase the bad parts. It doesn't gloss over. For Francine, the chocolate does not make the Holocaust okay. For Francine, there's not enough chocolate bars you can give out to people to erase the tragedy. The chocolate does not solve a whole lot. It doesn't solve everything. And the point, I love that the point of this story is not to give away everything you have when you really need it. Francine was fine, and her mother asked her. Her mother checked in first and asked for permission. She said, Francine, how are you doing? And Francine said, fine, Mama, I'm fine. And that's when they gave the chocolate, when she was able to help. I love that. You know, chocolate can't make up for everything. I have said before, and I'll say it again, that random acts of kindness will not be sufficient to overturn systemic injustice. There's simply no amount of small comforts that can make up for an unjust law or do as much good as a just law. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King made this point, speaking at Cornell, by saying, it may be true that the law cannot make a man love me, but it can keep him from lynching me. And I think that's pretty important also. Dr. King went on to say, it may be true that the law cannot change the heart, but it can restrain the heartless. And this is what we often say we have to do in society through legislation. Just government, fair and just government would have meant Francine, her mother, Helena, and the baby were never in the camp to begin with. And chocolate can't make up for that. That's true. We know this. But at the same time, given the situation, given that situation, it is also true that nothing can replace that chocolate. Nothing can replace the worth of that small gesture, that little bit of sweetness. If you can, watch Dave Chappelle's monologue from last night's Saturday Night Live. One of the things Dave Chappelle talks about is advocating for random acts of kindness for Black people who don't deserve it. And he put this in opposition to all the random acts of cruelty and not so random acts of cruelty, also undeserved. Give a Black person an ice cream cone, Dave Chappelle says. They'll be confused. They might take it. It's an excellent monologue if you can watch it. We are all human beings. Nothing can replace those small human comforts for us, and we need and deserve comfort. And that doesn't negate the work still yet to be done. If you've heard anything in the past 24 hours, it's that the work continues. Yes, we know. And this morning, writer and producer Akila Green wrote on Twitter, come on, let's allow ourselves one more day of binging donuts and Halloween candy. We'll get our act together tomorrow. If you've got the Halloween candy, today is the day. During coffee hour, after this service, we will break into small groups as we've been doing. And if you're willing, I'd like you to share a time when you were able to give someone else that proverbial bar of chocolate, when you were able to provide that comfort, or when someone else unexpectedly gave you that little bit of hope in this past year. And if you don't think you have a story, that's fine. I invite you to come and listen and talk with your fellow church members, to be with one another. The work is not done. We know. That work includes forming bonds of mutual care and love with your church family. It's more important than ever. We're contending now with the fact that at face value, half our neighbors voted for racism and fascism. We had hoped for a wave of compassion to overtake the land. Instead, even more people this year than in 2016 voted for authoritarianism, for dehumanization, for cruelty. I've seen a few calls on social media for the left to be understanding of how disappointed the right is, that the right now feels the same kind of distress that people on the left felt 4 years ago, that we should extend comforting words to them at this time in their despair. That is not a true equivalency. It is a false one. 4 years ago, racial minorities and the LGBTQ community in particular were crushed, not because their person lost. They were crushed at the prospect of being actively oppressed for at least the next 4 years. And indeed, that oppression came true. So it's not fair. It is a false equivalency to compare that fear of being actively oppressed with the fear of no longer being able to oppress people you don't like. They're not the same. There's a big difference between the fear of having your rights stripped away, your children taken from you, your health care taken from you, with the fear of no longer being the only group with human rights. They are not the same. During the first peak of the pandemic, I heard someone say that when we saw people crying after the 2016 election, they weren't crying, again, because their person lost. They were crying because they knew. They knew what was going to happen. And then it did. I think liberals perennially believe at heart that this overwhelming wave of justice and compassion is always just about to break on society. It seems self-explanatory, doesn't it? That we should care about other people. Surely it will dawn on everyone any day now. So to realize anew this week that about half our voting neighbors don't feel the same way, to realize about half our voting neighbors said yes to concentration camps at the border, said yes to stripping rights from transgender people, and are now sad that they didn't get to retain that power. That realization is daunting at best. So of course, yes, the work continues. But I hope that none of you have forgotten that although the race looked to be nearly 50-50, that was not so in truth. This was brought home for me yesterday in a Tumblr post of all social media platforms from someone outside the US who wrote, "Just want to say how proud I am of America right now. Removing a dictator during a dictatorship is nearly impossible. Typically, it takes a civil war or a death or a power vacuum. But for 4 years, you've been fighting back, and now you're fighting a heavily rigged, horribly unfair election, and not giving the landslide victory that dictators typically get. I want you to know that many of us across the world, we see those 50-50 looking results, and we don't see America as half and half, but as 30% who were given an easy vote, and 70% people whose vote was very hard to get out. We see the lines, we see the fake ballot boxes, votes often outright thrown away. We see your judges fighting to count every vote, and the diverse new Congress people you voted in. The narrative of a close race omits that one team had skates on a downhill road, and the other had an obstacle course littered with dirty needles, fences to break through, barbed wire to crawl under, and rabid dogs blocking the way. Now, that is hyperbole, yes, but it does give me hope that when I see a TV screen split evenly down the middle, that is not the full story. And when you feel dispirited about that fact, remember that it only looks that way because of the gutting of the Voter Rights Act, ongoing voter suppression, relentless gerrymandering, and thriving propaganda. And fascism still lost, in part because of the amazing hard work of so many of you. So many wildflowers worked so hard. I'm very proud of you. The work, it's true, is not done, but neither are the acts of comfort that you deserve in that hard work amidst the obstacle course. Rest and repair, self-care, and yes, leisure time must also continue. The fact that the work will always be there doesn't mean that you need to always be there round the clock 24/7 doing the work. The fact that the work is larger than anything you can accomplish in a lifetime does not mean that you need to give all of your lifetime to doing that work. You should not give up your whole life. I think sometimes the religious left falls into this trap of assuming that we do justice work for other people, more needy people than us. However needy we currently are, there's someone needier, and that's who we're working for. Forgetting that there are no other people. And we are included in that circle of care. In his work, What Are People For?, the poet Wendell Berry writes, "The grace that is the health of creatures can only be held in common. We hold each other in that common health." He writes, "The task of healing is to respect oneself as a creature, no more and no less." And I think that means respecting our mortal and bodily needs for treats, for warmth, for comfort, for Netflix once in a while. We must sustain ourselves and one another. Berry goes on to say, "To be creative is only to have health, to keep oneself fully alive in creation, to keep creation fully alive in oneself, to see creation anew, and to welcome one's part in it anew." You can't do that by denying yourself. In the last few lines of the poem, Berry writes memorably, "Rest and rejoicing belong to the task and are its grace. Let tomorrow come tomorrow. Not by your will is the house carried through the night." I remembered that, especially Tuesday night when it seemed clear we would have no answer. Not by my will alone would this house be carried through the night, and so I went to bed and took my rest. I'd like to point out here what real self-care looks like. It's not just getting manicures and binge watching Netflix. Although I will say I myself am banking new episodes of The Mandalorian like a savings account against despair. The day will come and I'll know the day. Be that as it may, self-care is not just about luxury. It means ensuring you have a decent quality of life because you deserve it. Let me say that again. You deserve it. Take the time to cook for yourself healthy foods. Take the time away from your television and your computer to have a snack, take a break. Do your laundry. Get sleep. You deserve it. And I say this as a Unitarian Universalist. You can be assured that you deserve it because we believe everyone does, even you, even us. There are times when we absolutely must sacrifice those things temporarily, when we have to go 5 days without a shower because a hurricane or a tornado hit our town. But I think those occasions are more rare than we think because self-martyrdom is so attractive. It's more common, I think, that when the times get emotionally tough, we give up our comforts and the care of ourselves before we are even asked to, before it's necessary, to try to steel ourselves and our hearts against our own wants and our own needs, against our own creaturehood. Now, I follow a number of historians on Twitter, and every so often, one of them will make an observation about doomsday preppers, right? The people who will stockpile 4 or 5 years of freeze-dried food and guns and ammo in a bunker in case society collapses. And the observation from these historians, mostly female historians, is that ammo is rarely useful in saving lives. Ammo doesn't much come in handy during actual collapses, unless you know pottery, knitting, gardening, and the care of children, unless you can play a musical instrument and whip together something tasty out of random ingredients. Your people will not make it. You have to be able to mend your clothes. You have to be able to fashion little toys to keep your children occupied. Or you have to know and love someone who can. Can you think of someone who used to knit or sew in the pews during church? Your people will survive with warm feet. Can you think of someone who would always bring extra zucchini or eggs from their backyard to give away at coffee hour? Your people will survive with full bellies. Can you think of someone who doted on your children when they were fussy during the service? Your people will survive with safety and care. And can you think of someone who sang a song during worship? Your people will survive with glad hearts. It's not the ability to soldier through needing as little as possible that will ensure our survival, but the ability to comfort ourselves and one another. It's not by needing nothing that we will make it, but by meeting our needs. In our foresight, packing even one small bar of chocolate, knowing the day may come when our life or someone else's depends on it. Amen. Blessed be. And I invite you to join in singing our closing hymn.